And in terms of children, have there been any enhanced risks to children of getting the COVID vaccines, or maybe is there a difference between the mRNA versus the regular type of vaccine? Do you see any?
So the mRNA vaccines, in the end, were the safer vaccines compared to AstraZeneca.
Okay.
So in fact, many
safer in what sense?
So AstraZeneca had a lot of side effects, and in fact, many countries like Australia withdrew AstraZeneca. Okay. Right. I mean, and there's an issue of risk balance. So people knew what the risks were. It's not that they're saying these are completely safe. We know there are risks, but in the overall scheme of things, it's still safer if everyone takes it, because fewer people are going to die or whatever. And so the risk balance is different for young and old. Older people have worse side effects of COVID, more likely to die, and so the benefit for them, the cost balance is usually more positive, right? But for young people, less likely to die or have serious side effects from COVID, and so there the risk balance is different. So in the case of AstraZeneca with Australia, they started picking up these clots, and people had after having the AstraZeneca very quickly, because they have something called an immunization register, which is something we need in Sri Lanka, but we don't have. And so they started withdrawing it for younger age groups, and then they went up the age groups, and eventually basically it was not available. I think it's no longer available in Australia. So there's a different risk balance. So I think the mRNAs tend to be much safer. And that's what this study actually showed. The mRNA, yes, they have certain specific side effects, muscle problems, for example, various kinds of blood cell problems that I won't go into detail, but which are very specific to those vaccines. But they are generally very safe. And in fact, the pharmaceutical industry is now working on using this mRNA technology for other vaccines. So it's not just COVID, not just emergency vaccines. So I think they're safe. I think for kids, yes. I mean, you have to think. I said, if I was the health minister in the cabinet, I would raise taxes to pay for this. But of course, as you know that. But I would buy these vaccines, and I would also be buying influenza vaccines, which is actually, because it's now in the influenza category. Even if these infections like COVID or influenza don't kill you, particularly for working people, you can be sick for 3 or 4 days. I did speak, and I can tell you that I had some interaction with some politician. I'm not going to name that person. Fairly well-known person had influenza, and as a politician, probably meets hundreds of people every day. So you're like very exposed. And I asked the wife, maybe he should get the influenza vaccine, which is not available. It's not done here. But in rich countries, they give influenza vaccine on an annual basis, and it's often free. And I think we should be doing that, and we should be adding COVID boosters, because the COVID vaccines from 2020 are no longer useful. The vaccine has evolved, and so you need essentially to update your immunity every year with the new strains. That's the wrong word, but the new variants. And so you need, just like with influenza. Influenza also changes every year. We give people ideally a vaccine every year.
So Dr. Ravi, just one more question, and it will be, I think you have to take off the Institute of Health Policy hat and speak to us as an economist, because I know you've got some views on the economy. And the last time we spoke, we talked about the political class really not understanding the problem of revenue in Sri Lanka. You've just had decades of, inadequate revenue. But when you look at the current trajectory with the IMF, I think we've missed pretty much all our revenue
as
targets,
predicted.
I think, as predicted, which is also the case for most IMF programs, let's be fair.
And it's the case for all revenue forecasts by the government of Sri Lanka. This is
precisely.
This is not a. It's a feature of the system. It's not a bug. It's the feature of the budgeting process. Yes,
it's a rule, not the exception. So, how do you view, just very briefly, how do you view this current trajectory? Because I think the idea is that we will reach that sustainability in a couple of years' time, regain access into capital markets and re-borrow ISBs, and then get back to, I guess, where we were in 2021, maybe?
19 or 18.
But I just want to give you the opportunity just to give us a very general sort of overview of what you think the listener or the audience should know about the trajectory we're on right now.
So I think that we're not going to be back to normality. I will tell you that. So, I mean, the bad news that people need to understand even if we met the targets in the current IMF agreement, we will not be back to normality. So this program is not designed to put us in a normal position where we have a sound foundation for solid, rapid growth. Nonsense. We will be extremely vulnerable. So, and I'll explain that a bit further, but in terms of what's happened the past year, yeah, I think, there have been slippages, right, as you would expect, but the economy has been stabilized. We have access to foreign exchange. These foreign exchange is now coming in. It's not so restrictive. And growth, I think we started, or at least there was some growth in the past few months. So we have made some progress, and we shouldn't. I wouldn't diss that. I mean, it's in the positive direction, even if we're not hitting all the targets. But I think that at the end of the day, this is an interim agreement. It's designed, yes, to get us back into the capital markets, but it is not designed to give us much flexibility. So if we stick with the current IMF agreement, we will be in a straitjacket. We will be under the control of these institutions. We will have very little flexibility to do what voters want. Governments will find it very difficult because, if voters want certain things and the government doesn't have money to spend on those things, because they don't have enough taxes, that's going to be a political problem, right? And, I think it's Dr. Sharmini Kaur. I noticed she wrote an article a few days ago, and she's correct. I mean, even under the IMF targets are reached, two things to know. We will still be a highly indebted country. The debt will stabilize at 120% of GDP. Wow. It will stabilize, right? This is not a normal country. It means we will be extremely vulnerable to a sudden global economic shock. If global interest rates suddenly go up, if the global economy goes into a big recession, we will be stuck. We will go over the cliff again. This is just to get us, it's like an emergency program to get us back on our feet, but we're not in a position to run, right? And secondly, I said there's no money in the system. Why? Because even under the agreement, the taxes are going to go up, but I think half the taxes are going to go in interest payments. And this is even after we repudiated some of the debt to our domestic creditors, to the DDO, but also we don't know about the foreign debt yet. Right. But so it is not a good position, and it's not a good political position for any future government. So I think the real question is, I think we made some progress. But the real question is, if we want solid growth, if you, as Sri Lankans, want your country to be a rich country one day, you want your children and grandchildren to live in a rich country, which is what I want, right? I want my children and grandchildren to live in a developed, high-income country. I want my country to be as well off as Vietnam or as Thailand or Malaysia. They're going to be rich countries. Right? In 30 years, if you have an interview with me, Vietnam will be on the verge of becoming a developed country. They were poorer than us before COVID, right? If we want to be in that position, we're not going to do it with a debt over 120%. So the bottom line here is, it's the same old problem. The tax target is too low. And there have been some American observers who also pointed out the IMF tax targets are too low. Really, we need to raise taxes, I think, to around 20% of GDP. The IMF target is 15.
Are they around 12 right now?
No, the target eventually is 15.
But
I think we're about 12. 12 is no higher than it was under the previous, before 2019, right? Previous time the Ranil Singh was, he was Prime Minister then. So this is not a great change, and we have this huge extra debt to pay off. So I think we really need 20%. That would allow us to pay back debt fast, and it would allow us to invest in public infrastructure, invest in health, in education, which is what the voters want.
Yes.
And social chances to make things like a bit better for the people at the very bottom who have to suffer through this transition.
Dr. Ravi Rannan-Eliya, thank you very much for being on Insight with us, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Sure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.